Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are, this is our first office hour session with the identity group. So we're going to try to do these every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Talk about some community news, talk about news from the identity group at Microsoft, and talk about other interesting questions and concerns people bring to us, bring to the table. So be sure to bring us your hard questions, bring us your issues that you have that you want to get answered and things that don't make sense, and we'll do our best to get them answered. And today we've got a guest, and Christos is going to talk a little bit about some news and announcements that have come out in the past couple of weeks, and then we'll jump over and talk to a friend of identity named Vinny. So Christos, go ahead.
Brand of identity. I love that introduction. Right. Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll start with some community shoutouts and some interesting news. We'll try to cover what has been announced in the last couple of weeks since it's our first time, and since we're going to be doing this regularly, we'll try to find blogs from the community. So if you write anything around Azure AD, if you have any code or any samples, then make sure to share them with us so we can give you a shout out, because we're always looking for interesting things and how people are solving problems in production. With the news then, starting with the biggest announcement over the last couple of months, Microsoft announced that we will be sunsetting finally the older ADAL library, the one that allows you to communicate with Azure AD and authenticate and get tokens. And finally, we will be moving forward with MSAL. These libraries have been out for a while, but now it's time for us to make a commitment. So starting from June 30th of 2022, ADAL will not be supported anymore. That gives you enough time to start migrating your apps from ADAL to MSAL. And as a matter of fact, this week, me and JP spent some time on our stream on Tuesday and Wednesday, migrating one of the .NET web apps from our samples from ADAL to MSAL. Very interesting stream. We hit some issues and some bugs, so it was great for us to be able to go through that experience, so you don't have to go through the pain points. Make sure you catch our stream. These were the news. I mean, this is the biggest announcement from a developer perspective, I think. There's also other interesting news for IT pros. However, well, first of all, you'll get full support, right? I mean, if ADAL is not supported, then you are in a bit of a pickle, right? So we want to make sure that developers use the latest and greatest. MSAL also comes with the access to V2 by default, the V2 endpoint. So that's very important for us. We want to make sure that everyone is using the version 2 endpoint of Azure AD. So that's the biggest point. And then MSAL has better coverage and support for most of the languages out there. And full API feature parity. So anything that you could do with ADAL in the past now is fully supported inside MSAL. And we'll be adding more and more features on MSAL as we go forward. Anything I didn't cover?
No, that's great. Thanks.
There you go. Okay. Thank you for that. That was a great question, because I'm pretty sure that people will be wondering why and how. Moving on to the community news, I caught this video from Travis Roberts. He's doing a great job in explaining the differences between Azure business to business and Azure AD business to consumer. He also included some great links below, so make sure you catch his video. Great job by Travis. And another blog post I got from Christian on the Tech Direct archive, where he's talking about how to set up your Azure AD tenant. So if you've never done this before and you want to get started with the Azure Active Directory, then this is a great blog post on how to get started with setting it up and getting off the ground. A shameless plug, obviously, we do cover a lot of things as a team here. So recently I did a session on service principals and managed identity. These are some of the secrets, as I call them, around Azure AD. So not many people are aware of service principals and Azure managed identities and how they can be used in the Azure context or local development or for CI/CD purposes. So if you get a chance, you can catch the video on YouTube and see what we talked about and what we covered, and also some demos and code there. And finally, something that we covered this week during our stream, and I couldn't find the link at the time, so I thought people may be interested in this one. I know lots of people that are doing ARM templates and they're using Visual Studio Code. One of the biggest challenges there is that if you have a giant chunk of JSON, it's not very easy to visualize that. So Ben Coleman did a great job in creating this extension for Visual Studio Code that you can graphically display your ARM templates and understand where your dependencies are, where your services reside, and how you're doing it. So great job by Ben. Give this VS Code extension a go, and please let us know if you have any questions. That's me. These are the news of the week.
It's funny that there are so many different visualizers for ARM templates. It kind of makes you wonder, like, maybe a giant block of JSON isn't the easiest to work with. So,
yeah, let's not touch YAML, right?
Oh God! Oh my God! No, we'll do YAML embedded in an ARM template, and then everyone will hate us. So. All right, so we've got Vinny with us today. Vinny is a cloud solution architect manager. So, but he's only been a manager for a few months, so we've still got time.
So can you say manager with a little less disdain in your voice, John?
Well, we figured we'd talk now before you completely atrophy. I didn't want to bring it up at first. I didn't want you to lose any street cred, but Vinny. Vinny and I have worked together a long time, and he does amazing work with data things. So, data warehouses, data streaming, data analysis, everything you possibly ever need to do with data, he's done it, and he's my go-to guy when I need help with something data related. And this week he did some work in MSAL with Python, and we thought it'd be great for him to come on and sort of tell us about his project and tell us about his experience using the library for the first time with some managed services and all sorts of cool stuff in Azure. So Vinny, tell us what you were doing. What were you building?
Yeah, so I will walk you through what we were trying to do, and then also come back with some gripes and some questions. So prepare yourselves. The objective here was to interact with a Databricks cluster. And we were trying to prove a couple of different scenarios. So the whole idea was that we needed to be able to show how a service principal and a managed service, managed identity, either associated to system managed or user managed, how that can communicate to get a token to then be able to authenticate to Databricks. So
now what was trying to connect to Databricks? Was it like a VM or a function or some other service in Azure? Like, what were you trying to connect to Databricks with?
So it was just REST APIs.
Okay.
Essentially, we were trying to manage a set of jobs. And let me show you quickly a sequence diagram, which talks a little bit about what it is we were trying to do. So bear with me as I pull this up here. All right, so screen's coming up here.
Yep, we're up.
So this is how it typically works, right? You've got, so let me just walk through a couple of chunks here. Under a service principal, say, right? A user is going to register that service principal and get back an app ID and generate some kind of client secret, or if we want to use certificate, right, we associate it to the service principal. A user then has to go to the workspace and associate that user to the workspace in a service principal context. That is done through REST API. There's not a good UI for that. So we go to the workspace, we add the service principal, give it the appropriate entitlements that it needs, and that then gives us the ability to say, okay, now I can take the service principal and I can authenticate against Active Directory, I can get a token, and I can go do other stuff. I can create a cluster, I can submit a job, whatever needs to happen. And so the rest of these series look like that. I go to Active Directory, I do my my app registration, I go to the workspace, I associate the service principal to the workspace, then I get my personal access token, then I associate it to the workspace, and then in the actual work happens down here in these last set of sequences. So the authenticate is.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
So the first half of this is configuring Databricks to use Azure AD for sign-in, right? And to get an access token, like a personal access token, which is really just like a static string, right? Just like a GitHub PAT or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay. And then
exactly.
So once you've done that work in the top, then for subsequent work, for ongoing, talking to jobs and creating jobs and doing different types of work, that's happening in this bottom half, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, that makes sense.
So this part of it here now, if I shade it slightly differently, we'll go with chartreuse. Does that count?
So the top.
that brings back memories from the old Access days, man.
Well, remember, as a data guy, he uses a giant Excel sheet with many tabs that he calls SQL Server.
You know what? It took How long have we been doing this?
We're
5
on to
minutes
him.
to get to the insults. All right, that's
We're on to him now.
Whatever tool works for you, my friend. Whatever tool works for you.
That's right. We're not here to tool shame.
Yeah, we don't that. Safe space.
We're not, but we are. It's fine.
This is very much a personal attack, not a generic attack on all data folks. It's very, very targeted towards you. So just want to make sure that's clear.
I appreciate you too. All right, we'll leave it there. So that's service principles, right? And I'm talking to Active Directory in that instance. MSAL does a great job with this for Python. There's examples, it's laid out. I'm talking to common endpoints, and it's fairly straightforward on how to do it. The most aggravating thing I had to deal with was a resource versus a scope. So /.default for everything, and I'm done. Databricks in its authentication is very finicky about making sure that the scope is appropriately set. So if it's not scoped to Databricks resource, then you can't necessarily do any of the work. So this is the backdrop, right? We did this with a service principal. Everything felt pretty good.
Now, one more question. I'm sorry. One more question.
Yeah.
Is this like a management activity? Is this for you to like manage the cluster or manage the job, or is this for like accessing data and actually doing like work within a job in the Databricks cluster?
The intent in this particular project was to be able to manage jobs, essentially delete and submit jobs. That's the overall objective. Which
so you're managing a Databricks cluster. And jobs that are in that cluster, and of course it's Azure Databricks, so you've got to use Azure AD to interact with that without a user present, right?
We can, right? That's one approach, right? So that's the whole idea. Now let me go over to the project that we've got set up, and you know what? Let me go over to code. Sorry, let's do this. Okay, so on the right hand side here is the pretty version of the Markdown. But essentially, this is a project that we put together. It's published on GitHub, and I put together the authentication piece of it. Okay, it lays out here what we intend to do. Basically, you can put a set of job JSON files, which are configurations that we can then use a template to go submit into the Databricks cluster to create jobs. That's what this accomplishes. I talked a little bit about what has to be done on how we have to add people in. I'll get back to why this what this allows us to do, this particular curl post. But more importantly, let me go down for a second to the authentication piece of it. So this is what we ended up finding out. So when I'm trying to use MSAL as a service principal, which is under normal context, meaning I'm talking to Active Directory as I normally would, everything works great. I can wire up the endpoint, I can scope it correctly, and I get back a bearer token that's appropriate. Where this kind of became an issue was when I was trying to do this under a managed service identity. The challenge with the managed service identity is that it's two things. One, the endpoint, while it's a commonly known endpoint of 169 dot number, whatever that's being, right? That is not something that MSAL considers a well-known host. So if you look in the kind of the backend Python libraries, it's not included in there. The other thing is that the endpoint is HTTP, not HTTPS. And so what MSAL does, at least in the way it was implemented in Python, is that it chunks up that URL and it takes the base of it and then it adds on the rest of the address that it needs, and it prepends it with HTTPS. So I tried to do this within MSAL and it failed. And I started to tweak the library to maybe see if I could kind of force it through, but to no real avail there. So let me show you what we ended up doing to be able to get around this.
So that, just a quick break, does that mean that we need to go back to the Python team or MSAL and then try to fix these things, especially around Databricks, if managed identity is not fully supported out of the box?
Well, you identity gurus, that's what I wanted to bring to you guys.
Brilliant! This is what we want.
So
If
this
that stops people from using it properly, then...
This
So
is
I think
this is the fundamental challenge, right? When we're doing managed service identity authentication, it is done within an Azure resource. So that identity is scoped and can only come from a specific resource. Okay, the endpoint that it talks to is something that we own and we manage, and we ensure the communication is done appropriately. So why wouldn't that be a well-known host or a well-known endpoint for us to work with, right?
So,
Also, why would it, I mean, it's not HTTPS either, which I don't necessarily, this isn't my area, so I don't necessarily know why it's not, but it falls outside of the typical constraints that are put into place for every other type of authentication approach that we have out here.
Well, so here's the big thing about that, right? Is and this is obviously a pretty big failing in our docs and how we explain to folks what to use at what time, right? Because if you look at MSAL as a library and what MSAL as a library is supposed to do, it is a token acquisition library, right? So the point of it is to go through well-known flows, OAuth flows, OpenID flows, to acquire tokens for users or acquire tokens for applications too, in a myriad of different scenarios of, I'm in a mobile app, I'm in a web app, I'm in this, I'm in that. And I have a user, I don't have a user, so let's go and do, whatever. Managed service identity shortcuts a whole lot of that, because managed service identity, the endpoint itself handles the token acquisition. So the endpoint itself is almost you can think of it as like MSAL as a service for just your VM or just your function or just your Azure resource that identity is assigned to.
So it's a pivot point, essentially.
Right, so you don't actually need MSAL when you're doing managed service identity, because all you're doing is asking the MSI endpoint for a token, right? So you're saying, hey, give me a token for this resource. And so like the MSI endpoint and the MSI secret or whatever, there are 2 or 3 parameters you need to call that endpoint with. It's going to handle going and fetching a token because it's sort of authenticated already, in the sense that nothing can call that endpoint unless you are on that VM or on that resource. And because it's a private address, nothing can call it externally. So the net of that is that...
But it is a standard part of the authentication process, right? So I can't do anything else with that managed identity against AD, right? So the only approach that I...
You can if you assign permissions to that managed identity to do things in AD, to do things to your Azure resources. It can be used for those things, but maybe we back up a second too and say a managed service identity is a service principal, right? And a service principal is just like a service account like we've had in the past. So it's an Azure AD resource. It's an Azure AD principal, a user.
Right. But I don't. The benefit's supposed to be I don't have to do anything in AD with it.
Correct.
I can have it be isolated.
So it's isolated. You don't manage the secrets. That's the 95% of the value proposition is you don't know the secrets and you don't manage them. We manage them for you. And the way that we can get away with managing these secrets, which are the things you would typically use to authenticate a service principal to Azure AD, if you do it manually. You don't have to do that with MSI because the MSI subsystem does it for you. So if you were doing, say you were doing a Databricks cluster in
well, hang on a second. Hang on. Before you get to the theoretical, let me suppose this then to you. Why should I care?
You shouldn't care.
I mean, in all honesty, right? Like, why right? So this is the thing. I know that a managed identity and a service principal, you know, it's a car of different colors, but it's still the same car, right? And I shouldn't. And the thing that I'm trying to do is the same. I'm trying to get a token to go do something. Now, granted, I'm trying to do it in a scoped way, which is fine. But the question then becomes, if we're still fundamentally behind the scenes talking to Active Directory, even though it's essentially a proxy, right? That's what I'm going through that well-known host. It's doing a double jump, giving me my token back, and then managing that for me. But it's still the same kind of gyration as you get from a service principal. From my perspective, I shouldn't have to care, or at least that 169 endpoint should be something that the library accepts because it still kind of functions in the same way, right?
Yep.
I don't know why it would be separate.
Yeah,
well,
we can fix that. Right?
We know why it's separate, right? Which is that MSI is an Azure and Azure AD and 27 other teams are all working on different things to make that work. And so, you know, so what we've ended up with is we need to make it super clear how you get a token in various scenarios. And that could mean adding MSI support to MSAL, right? So if you're in an Azure resource and you're using MSAL, or because think about like the dev experience, right? If I'm working locally and I'm using MSAL to get a token for my local machine or for a specific environment, I don't want to necessarily have to change that code and have two different paths, one for managed service identity in Azure AD, or one for managed service identity in Azure, and one for my on-prem or some other environment, right? So
well, functionally, that's what I've had to do, right? So I actually have a service principal with a certificate locally.
Yep.
And when I push this up to a data science VM that I'm SSH'd into,
Yep.
you know, functionally, that's what happens, right? If I'm up here and I try to run my curl command to go get my token, I can do it. But if I try to run this locally, it doesn't have the service context. I can specify client ID in this, though, so that I can pass that as part of it because you can have more than one MSI associated to a particular resource.
Yep.
So I could give it everything but an authorization element, right? Either in the form of a secret or a certificate. The only thing I can't do is talk to it from outside of the resource that it's scoped to.
You may want to go cycle this this user identity thing as you just put an active access token out on the internet.
That's fair. Unless you're on my VM, you can't use it.
I totally agree that like I need a token, and if we're saying MSAL is the token getter, right? For all of Azure AD or all of the Microsoft identity platform, then it would make a whole lot of sense to have that also be a part of MSAL, even if because the MSAL library today handles all of the specifics around OAuth flows and OpenID flows and client certificate grants and all the different kinds of sort of standardized grants you can use against Azure AD, but there's also been a really active push or an active drive to say, if you're a developer, we don't want you to worry, care, or have to worry or care about the kind of flows being used, right? We want MSAL to go get tokens for you, and you don't have to be an identity pro in order to do that, right? And
so let me talk about where I see it at, right? So this is what I ended up having to do as a result of the gap, and so I know you want to get professorial, John, but let me walk through this. I'll talk about it.
No, it's cool. Go ahead.
You can drop the knowledge. So if it's an MSI, I actually have to we still expect, and I provide instruction to do this inside of the README, but for the authority to be the well-known host, the root of the well-known endpoint, to be able to then go to get the token from within the resource that you scope the identity to. But if it's a certificate or a key, then we build the call accordingly for MSAL for the confidential client application. And I tried to crawl back in through this, and you know, I want to tip my hat to the Python plugin people, because I love the process of debugging code for Python in code. It's so much less painful than just trying to, you know, kind of correct wherever it is your stuff is sitting. But all right, so it goes here and obtains token. If I keep going back here, go to definition, we then go back another layer in this onion, and it should take us back to something where go to definition. Am I already in it? Is that why? I love it so much, I can't remember how to use it.
It's a tool, though, right? I mean, you know,
It happens to the best of us.
you can.
Yeah.
That's cool, though. No, that's fine. There you go.
Yeah, I think there it is. It's right down here, I believe.
Yeah.
So it starts to break apart. That's if the obtained token is in the token cache. If it's not there, there's a bit of code here that actually has the hosts that are valid. So anyways, I'll scroll around for a second here. But that's the whole idea, right? If inside of the allowed endpoints this is built in, then we could use this, right? Because it even returns it in the class that is going to be used across different applications within MSAL. So I think it's valid to do, but it was the only kind of thing that just said, you know what, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I totally understand where the frustration is. Like, it makes a lot of sense too, because, you know, if you look in like the .NET space, and I think this exists for Python, but I'm not sure. But like in .NET, there's one called Microsoft.Azure.app authentication, and that one sort of handles like, oh, are you local or are you in Azure, and it'll handle getting either a managed service token for you, or getting a using your local CLI or your local login. But it's sort of like a superset, right, on top of something like an MSAL. So I don't know if we have MSI libraries specifically for Python. I thought that we did, but we'll have to go back and look. But in some ways, it makes a lot of sense that would be, it's just another sort of type. I think the thing about it, not necessarily.
So this is the part of the code. This is the part of the code, by the way. So it's in the authority part of the MSAL library. So it's got worldwide well-known host and well-known B2C hosts.
Yeah.
But then down in this part of the code here, this is where it breaks apart. Okay, let me go ahead and strip apart the portions of the value that was passed in for the authority. Okay, if it's not in here, do some things. So I tried to mess around a little bit with this and start to add another if layer in here to allow me to recompile the endpoint value, but it does so much to it that it strips away part of it and tacks on others that it was just diminishing returns at that point. So,
well, and there's a whole lot of work you have to do to craft like a correct request, for example, to make it all the way to an OpenID endpoint or an OAuth endpoint, or our endpoints too. That with MSI you don't have to do all that work, because it's just a REST call, because something else, the MSI system itself, is what's handling the majority of the flow work here to talk to whatever the identity system is, to talk back to Azure AD. So
I deleted that MSI, by the way. It freaked me out. I went ahead and get rid of that.
So no, I mean it's interesting because like we sit around and noodle all this stuff all day long, right? Christos and I, and that's what we do all day, and so when you're explaining what your experience is like, my first reaction is like, oh well, that's like they're two different things, but the next reaction after that is like, well, why are they two different things, right? Or why,
right.
Like you said, you kind of said it perfectly, which is I just need to get a token, regardless of my environment, regardless of if I'm in an MSI environment, if I'm on-prem local, if I'm debugging locally, whatever. I just need to get a token. So it's a really neat, just a new perspective that we'll make sure that we take back to the right folks too.
I already took a note. We'll follow up after this call to make sure that that they're aware of the issue that we're dealing with or you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
So thanks
for.
Yeah,
and I'm happy to help plug in something into the GitHub issues, and this way, to kind of test the functionality, I can circle back and work on what we've got. Again, make sure you guys get feedback, and then also test if they do address it.
Well, and the code path for MSI is much more straightforward than a typical OAuth than an OAuth flow, right? Because it's essentially it's a REST call, right? It's make a REST call, get a token back, and you don't have to do all of the extra, get an authorization code, send that back to the token endpoint. You don't have to do all that. And you don't really have to deal with a lot of user interactive stuff, because most MSI, an MSI sort of by definition is an application level construct, right? Because it's in a function, it's in a VM, it's sitting somewhere where it's not it's not really user accessible, right? It's an app level thing that's on the VM. So yeah, like if you want to put in a GitHub issue, we'll be sure to kind of pile on top of it, or we'll talk to folks locally and see what see if this is something that's come up, or if it's something somebody's given some thought to, and see where we can run with it.
That I can do for you, man. That I can do for you. Nice. But it was fun though doing this. I had not. So as the Excel guru that I am, right? A little bit of Power BI when I have the time, John.
Sorry, man.
I had not spent time doing this. I functionally knew what needed to happen, and I'll credit the documentation, although it can be a little bit piecemeal. But there were examples that I was able to follow and work with. For those that are not developers, it's you got to put the right decoder ring on to make sure that you know what it is that you need to call. But it was there. It was there to be found if you asked the right question.
Yeah. Cool. So is your solution sort of like, is it out there for anybody to use? Is it is it something that
it absolutely is? Yeah. So I will.
Let's make sure we put a link out there to it. What was it? What was the link that you had?
Let me check the chat here.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, yeah. Let's put it in the chat room so everyone can.
I'm putting it in the chat room.
Cool.
And that's a solution somebody can grab today and start, changing it for their own needs, right?
So we built it out to specifically address a request from a customer we were working with, but it has been scrubbed and made more generic and then released under the MIT license, so that if there are other use cases, it can absolutely be applied for that. We did build it with a specific scenario in mind, which is why it does the thing that it does. But it's from an approach perspective, there are applications, and I'm sure folks can have some fun with it.
Well, what's super cool about it is that in a way it's sort of it's a community available abstraction between MSI and not MSI, depending on environments, right? So like that's immediately useful, because if it existed when you were starting your work, then you would have been able to use it. So the fact that it's out there now, that's awesome. I think it's a big contribution, and I think more folks are going to hit that in the future too. And having something out there is a great first start.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for your work and putting this kind of stuff out there, and then bringing weirdos like me to come talk data stuff with all that you have going on.
Yeah, well, cool. Well, thanks for coming. You feel free to hang out. You got anything else? Anything else about Azure AD that bugs you, or that you're curious about that we can answer?
Or that you love so
Actually,
much?
yeah. Well, so now that you bring it up,
Uh-oh.
well, the other thing that came up was, and there may be a common answer to this, so that's fine if there is. This scenario, let's say we're running this job management application, and a user who was responsible for executing this, whether on their own machine or from another machine, like a Bastion host or something, right? If we need to turn off that user's access, but they still had the application ID and a valid bearer token or a client secret, what's the approach to safely shut that down? And I had a conversation earlier. My direction was, well, the key may have an expiration period of a year, but you can delete it at any time, right?
Yeah.
The bearer token that you generate as a result of that is something that has a finite lifetime, but I don't know how you invalidate a bearer token programmatically, or even how you could tell what tokens have been generated under a specific context. So is there any guidance around that?
So there is logging. I think it might be in private preview. There's some more enhanced logging coming for service principals. It's been a big ask for a long time, which is if a service principal gets a token, I need to know about it. So that's coming. I think I think in certain scenarios it's enabled today, but it's coming more broadly a little bit later on this year. So that's the first one to sort of audit, right? To know what's happened. When it comes to rolling the secrets, yeah, you trash the secret and you get a new one. As far as invalidating the tokens themselves, so there's an access token. That's what you get from like an MSI, and typically what you get to talk to a service, right? By default, those access tokens are only valid for 60 minutes. So, but while you've got it, it's valid, right? And it'll be valid for that time window. So when that goes to a service, the service is going to look at that token, and the identity system isn't going to be a part of that, right? Because the token's already been acquired, and you're just sending it down to the downstream service, and the downstream service is saying, okay, yeah, this token's got my ID in it, and the expiration time is in 27 minutes, so it's good. I'm going to use it without asking the identity service, is this token still valid? There is one caveat or additional part to that, which is certain types of apps have things called refresh tokens, which are tokens that could live for days, weeks, months, years. Typically, so you're not signing into Outlook on your phone every 20 minutes or every 30 minutes. Refresh tokens can be invalidated because they live forever. They live much longer than a typical access token would be. So you can revoke a refresh token, but you can't revoke an access token. There are some policies and some ways you can sort of manipulate access token lifetime, but they all have their own trade-offs, right? So like if I'm having to re-authenticate for a new token every 20 minutes, it could negatively impact the user experience. But if we set it to a 3-hour token lifetime, well, 3 hours you can exfiltrate a lot of data in 3 hours with a valid access token, right?
So then, what does if I make this a little bit bigger? How do I interpret and let me share this part of my screen. Sorry, Christos, I'm gonna take over again.
That's fine.
So the values that come back as a result of the call, and I'm going to share appropriately here, just the information that's relevant. That resource identifier is specific to Databricks, so I'm not giving you anything that you shouldn't already have. How can I interpret that expires in and expires on? Are those
Those are so expires on and not before. Those are your timestamps. Those are like Unix epoch timestamps.
I was gonna say the epochs where they're, it's the number of ticks since 19, January 1st, 1970 or whatever.
Yep. So those are really the key to look at, because your service in the access token itself, because if you were to like look at the claims in the access token, because all of our access tokens are transparent. If you look at the claims, there'll be two claims in there: NBF, not before, and EXP for expiration, and they're the same thing. They're Unix timestamps. So those will be absolute times, typically an hour for an access token, and
okay,
that's kind of,
that,
that's kind of it,
that makes
right?
sense.
Like,
So
your
I
token
converted that 159439 number, the first one, and that gives me today at 3:56 GMT. Where we go local time.
So that's
So that's 3:56.
So that's a 4-hour access token, it looks like.
Okay.
Well, did you request that on your machine? Because on your machine it'd be UTC, right? On your VM?
No, I did it on my local machine here,
Okay.
which is a Mac.
So that's a... Wait a minute. Where did you...
And I did it in the context of my shell session locally here. So I drop this in, convert that, and I flip this to local time. So
357p, which is 4...
oh wait, no, here it is. So it's 11:54 GMT. That's weird. No, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
11:54 a.m. So wait, which timestamp did you take? Is that the
That was expires on.
Go back to your thing for a minute. To your time thing, 159439640.
I just generated a new one. Let me see what this gets us to. Okay, so I just generated one now. It is good until
11:58 your time, which is right now, effectively.
Huh.
Yeah, it doesn't seem... But that's your MSI response, right?
Yeah, so that is the... So I made this call to... I bet it's coming back GMT.
Well, yeah, I would imagine, because...
Yeah, because
you couldn't get to MSI.
Log on. I'm calling log on Microsoft.online.com. And so I imagine it's going back as UTC. So I'll take that as is.
Yeah. But right now UTC is pretty much, I mean, the current time is 431035 439 6687. Anyway, well, yeah, those tend to be an hour. They're valid for an hour. Most Azure AD access tokens are an hour, maybe a little bit longer. And we've got it all documented too as to how long the tokens are valid for, and then under what conditions they will be revoked, like a password, or not the access tokens, but refresh tokens. There is one extra thing that was announced. I think it was announced at Build, maybe a little before Build. It's called Continuous Access Evaluation, which is a new control that sort of solves the problem you're talking about, which is, I need to revoke somebody's access or something, but they've got an access token that's going to live on for a little while. But only certain, and it does some conditional access policy and things like that. Only certain applications support that right now. I think it's like Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. So it's not something you can use in your apps just yet. So.
Okay.
Yep.
And that takes us to 9 o'clock, by the way. It means our full hour is complete. We had a question. Somebody mentioned that maybe Sentinel can take behavior telemetry and revoke access tokens. Does anybody know whether that's possible or whether we should investigate?
I don't think that we have any mechanisms for revoking access tokens. We have a mechanism to revoke a refresh token, which is super long-lived. But I don't believe, and we can certainly check to make sure, but I don't believe we have any mechanism for revoking an access token specifically. There's a PowerShell method or PowerShell commandlet, which in Azure AD PowerShell something like revoke refresh tokens, but I don't think there's a way to revoke an access token. So even if your Sentinel signal indicated you needed to do it, I don't think you'd be able to do it because we never, like with a refresh token, you send the refresh token back to get a new access token, and you use the access token against the resource. So if your refresh token gets revoked, the next time you come in to say, hey, I need a new access token for this service, if it's been revoked, Azure AD says, sorry, your refresh token's been revoked. Nothing we can do about it, right? But with access tokens, you never go back to Azure AD with that access token to say, give me a new one, is it still valid, those sorts of things, because you've gotten the token and now it's proof of possession, right? Like you've got it in your hand and you're showing it over and over and over again to the service. And as long as the service can verify that it is an Azure AD issued token, which it does through the standard protocol stuff of pulling the keys and validating the token signature, as long as it can do that, it doesn't actually talk to Azure AD to say, is this access token itself still valid, as in, has it been revoked by something? So I don't think there's a mechanism for revoking them. And because of that, even if we knew it in Sentinel, there wouldn't be a good way for us to signal that upstream. But that might be something that we could look at for stuff like in the new continuous access evaluation too. So we should take a note to ask about that and see if that's something that's going to be coming.
Yeah.
Can I programmatically get a token for myself to work with without an interactive login?
Yeah. Well, you still log in one way or the other, but yeah. If you want one,
what would I provide? So, like, if I wanted it with the service principal, I make the call to log in at microsoftalign.com, and I give it some stuff, including a credential, and I get back my token. So if I'm doing it as myself, what do I have to provide to get a similar bearer token back?
You mean like impersonation?
No, just as me. Like, so the scenario, right? Let's say I have 10 Databricks clusters I want to go talk to, and instead of getting a personal access token for each one, I just want to be able to log in as my Azure AD authenticated context to be able to perform an operation. So can I get a token in the same way to then go use REST API calls?
Well, for you specifically, because you work here, we have like our Azure AD tenant has a bunch of policies that I don't even know I don't think you can even do. It's called an ROPC grant, Resource Owner Password Credential, where you just in the REST API or in the REST call you say, hey, here's my username and password. I'm almost certain we've blocked that. I don't think you can do that anymore. Which you wouldn't want to do that anyway, because you don't want your credentials being shared. The way that you would do it, if you wanted to access things as yourself, something needs to get a token as you. So in order for you to log in most cases it's interactive. So there's some shortcuts.
So even if I'm doing it inside of, say, like Postman, I would still get the one pop-up, hey, do a login, give me my MFA, get back a token value, and then I could do, programmatic operations that way. Or even in the command line, I could do the same thing. But then that's the context.
Now, there's one shortcut, and there's a specific scope for Azure Resource Manager called user impersonation, where you can sign in through an application as yourself and grant act as me permissions to that app to do work for you on your behalf. Now there's one other thing. I'm going to put it up here on my screen for a minute. In Azure CLI, there is I don't know where there's my window. In Azure CLI, zoom in a little bit here. There is it's AZ account get-access-token, and it has a flag called resource on it. So, like, say you wanted one for like the Microsoft Graph to go get something, you can do this in the CLI and go get, and an access token will be gotten for you. And it's sort of it's a way for testing REST API calls to Azure, AD, and stuff. So, and that works pretty well for certain things like Visual Studio, and some of the other tooling uses that under the hood to get access tokens to do work for you, like in the tooling and stuff. And I use it for an app that I was building for one of the guys here. So that's one option if you're debugging and testing and want to do work locally. That's one way to do it. So
that will actually work. Just AZ account get access token works.
Well, but
if you've already authenticated in.
Yep, it's because you logged in. It's because you authenticated to AZ to the
AZ CLI. Okay. So it already knows who I am. It already has a cached credential of some kind. I'm just getting an auth token to be able to use the REST APIs. That's it.
Well, for like for me, I'm on an Azure AD joined machine, so I've got a primary refresh token on my box through Windows Hello and all that. So there's a lot that's happening under the hood there. So like if you were to go and install CLI on just some random machine, when you tried to make that get access token call, it may fail because you're not on a corporate join machine.
Oh, absolutely. And I would expect it to, but if I did AZ account login, right, and authenticated in the method that we described interactively, I at least get a bearer token, that will set up the stage for then my user to get a bearer token, which I could then go do and work with API calls on. So that is exactly what I needed. Actually.
Yeah, so for you on your machine, it's a great way to get tokens just to do a postman request or to while you're debugging and stuff. But it's not something you could use in a fully automated headless manner like on a build machine or something, right? Yeah.
No, but imagine the scenario, right? So I am the environment admin. And I've just created 10 Databricks clusters. So I don't necessarily want to have to go in and generate a PAT token for my user for each cluster. So if I have a manifest of the clusters that I need to go talk to, and I can authenticate to Active Directory to get a token that then is scoped to Databricks, I can go iterate through each one of those and perform one operation, which is all I really need to do. I need to add the MSI or the service principal to that cluster, and I can do it in that way. So that's exactly what I needed to do.
Yeah,
actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this was a fantastically productive hour.
Yeah,
I should come listen to you guys every week or every time you do this.
Every Thursday at 11 Eastern, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific.
Although Wildfire has a question.
Rich. Let's see.
What would be the method to issue a kill command to a user logged into cloud services?
Control A, Shift Delete. That's my go-to command for everything. So that largely it's largely a function of hurry up and wait for the access token to expire. So you disable the user's account or trigger a password reset or one of the other things that invalidates their refresh tokens. However, with continuous access evaluation, when those changes occur, CAE causes the resource like Exchange or whatever to boot the user and say, oh, you need to re-authenticate. And of course, if your account's disabled, you can't re-authenticate at that point. So, in fact, I'll put a link in here in the chat to the new CAE stuff. So, certain things that are triggered, that trigger CAE, user accounts deleted or disabled, password is changed or reset, MFA is enabled, an admin explicitly revokes all refresh tokens for a user. That happens in, that's the PowerShell command we were talking about earlier, or when identity protection finds elevated user risk. Those are the kinds of things that CAE will trigger on. So let me put those in here, just so everybody can get out there. And that's something you sort of see evolving in the market too. Is a 60-minute access token is sometimes too long, and so we're seeing more demand from customers on like, what do we do? When I fire the super angsty, really upset employee over something, how do I keep them from taking data with them? Or when we, when we find a user's been breached or something, how do we, shut their access down as quickly as possible? And so there are lots of new solutions, modern solutions to modern problems coming out to address that sort of thing. So thanks for the question, Mr. Wildfire.
All
right, I will let you gentlemen get back to whatever it is you identity people do. My data questions have been answered, and I am able to go forth having to care less, but know more about what it is you do.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate you joining us, man.
Yeah, good stuff. Keep it
great.
up, guys.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
See ya.
All right.
Gotcha.
Well, I guess we've gone over, but that's cool. We've had some good questions, and
Well, we're 55 minutes into the actual stream.
That's true.
Ignoring the technical issues.
That's true.
So technically, we're still under the hour.
So one last thing. So next week we're going to be streaming again Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific, and was that 4 p.m. Across the ocean. And next Thursday we'll do office hours. We'll do office hours again. So we're gonna try to do office hours every Thursday. Try to keep it to an hour. We'll have some news, have some questions, have some discussion like we just had with a guest.
Yep.
And we're going to be bringing people in from our division too to talk about new things that are coming out in the product and new things that we're seeing with customers too. So, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us throughout the week. Of course, Christos and I are both on Twitter. We've got some email addresses and we've got some all sorts of different ways to contact us. So feel free to reach out, let us know your questions, let us know your concerns, or if you've done something really cool and you want to show it to us, please do that, and we'll get it highlighted on one of our future calls.
Not just highlight it. If you've done something and you want to come and talk to us, we'll be more than happy to actually host you. So
For sure.
we're looking for guests as well. If you want, just send us a request. We'll try to create some kind of a form that people can actually go to. I think that would be a good idea. But for now, feel free to reach out on Twitter or email. And thanks for joining, everyone. See you next week.